Welcome everyone to Bermuda's Future Digital Infrastructure. This is an exciting panel, an exciting time to be thinking about how we look at Bermuda's digital infrastructure. With me today, I have three panelists. We have Joel Ogren, who is our international panelist from, he is the founder and CEO of Assured Communications Advisor International. We have Jeane Nikolai, she's representing the Bermuda government. She is the Director of Energy, Telecommunications, Space and Satellite from the Bermuda government. And finally, our lawyer on the panel, Rees Davies. He is a partner from Carey, Olsen. So welcome to the panel. I'm sure we're going to have an exciting and enjoyable time touching on this very interesting topic. So first off, when we're talking about digital infrastructure, I'm going to set the scene a little and then I'll be asking some questions for the panel. So what is digital infrastructure? And if you think of it like it's the digital highway and the systems that it's associated with. So from a digital highway perspective, it's things like fiber, subsea, cellular, satellite, spectrum. From a systems perspective, it's the data that runs on that. So it's things like the cloud, the storage, the cyber issues around data, the energy needed to drive the data. And also it's about the frameworks and the systems around those frameworks. So whether that's the regulation or the legislation or just some of the commercial arrangements that are getting set up around data and data highways. So that's what digital infrastructure is. Now, Bermuda has just a little bit of background. We have 5 cables, submarine fiber optic cables that actually land in Bermuda, which is basically around the 3 network systems that operate. So we have 3 network systems and they have 5 submarine fiber optic cables that land in Bermuda. We have data centers in Bermuda and we have space and access for additional data centers. We have a commitment to renewable energy. We have a NASA tracking station. We have space and satellite hubs and frameworks that are particular for our particular region. So one of the things that has happened really over the past, dare I say, 18 months, as we all know with COVID, is there has been a significant groundswell in the digital transformation and digital inclusiveness. And really, this has been an essential part of how we live and work these days. And that all runs on this critical infrastructure, which is your digital infrastructure. So it certainly has been accelerated by COVID, but by no means it was actually moving in this direction prior to COVID. So we've got the remote working, we've got the reliance that is now needed in this digital infrastructure. So it has to be super reliable, it has to be super robust, because this is how we live, breathe, and eat these days. And we need to make sure that one of the things that you're seeing that's significantly changing are the platforms that people are using, and the content that people are accessing is changing and is progressing in sort of a new and exciting way. So Bermuda has got a significant infrastructure already, and we have done a lot of changes. So one of the things that I'm going to start with this panel was really sort of talking, the last time we talked was back in 2019. So since our last panel update, which was in 2019, what have we actually achieved? Because I think that it's just useful just to touch base to start off with of where have we been, what's our journey been, and then what does this mean for Bermuda? How does this impact Bermuda? What can we continue to do? And sort of what does this deliver at the end of the day? So perhaps I could throw to you, Jeane, and just from your perspective, particularly maybe in the space and satellite and energy area, you know, what has happened since 2019? Because I know a lot has happened in your space.
Sure, I can talk about that. What we're looking at in the space and satellite sector is we have developed our space and satellite strategy since 2019. So in broad terms, the strategic goals of that strategy are to build Bermuda's reputation as a responsible leading jurisdiction for space and satellite related business, and not just space and satellite, but the businesses that are related to that industry. We're seeking to enhance our domestic space and satellite related activities, businesses. and our capabilities. We're looking to further integrate Bermuda in the international space industry. And we're seeking to commercialize Bermuda's satellite slots. We have 4 of them, actually. One of them has an asset in it. It's not doing anything. It's kind of just a placeholder for the moment, but it's there and it's active if the right business opportunity comes along. So those strategic goals are built on the pillars of policy and regulation. We have a robust policy and regulatory environment. They're also based on domestic capability or capacity building, international partnerships and engagement, and our orbital resources. So that's kind of what's new there. And some examples of the benefits anticipated by implementing that space strategy are things like improved satellite communications, remote sensing and Earth observation, space insurance, space situational awareness and debris monitoring, and that one's huge with the constellations that have been going up, particularly in the low Earth orbit space, and new space, sort of on orbit servicing, which that's kind of new-ish, asteroid mining. It's not beyond the pale. It's still in very, very early stages of investigation. And even debris recovery, because that one's going to become increasingly more important as more stuff goes up there.
Yes, I found it interesting that I can't remember if it was Elon Musk and the NASA when they did that, and during the handover they were saying, now handing over to Bermuda as it was going up. So it certainly sort of shows our role in that technology and how that's sort of coming through.
Yeah. I mean, I think our Earth station services are unique for this part of the world, really. Without Bermuda, there's a lot that couldn't happen as seamlessly as it does.
Exactly. So sort of moving from the space and satellite now, Steve, to perhaps some of the other end of the spectrum, which is the subsea side of things and submarine cables. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an update since 2019 about what's happened in that space.
Sure. Thanks, Fiona. I think it's worth saying, though, actually, just off the back of what you were introducing, the whole working from home, the effects of COVID on the community has actually shown Bermuda's great resilience and existing infrastructure and how it's proven that we can carry on regardless. Most of us who live here on the island and work here know exactly how important that is when we have hurricanes every year, that we're actually able to get back online and work seamlessly throughout. So it's a system that we rely upon, and I think we just don't realize how important it is, or even in fact it's there. And most people don't even realize how much of our internet and digital activity actually relies upon cabling. 98% of internet traffic, according to Google, actually goes through subsea cabling. So that is how critical this infrastructure is. And whilst Bermuda has been a core part of the international development of subsea cabling and satellites, we were used very early on when companies were getting together, joint ventures around the world in trying to fund all these projects. And we've been very familiar with it. And so are not new to it, as it were. But something that has happened since the last session in 2019 is that we have introduced the Submarine Communications Cables Act back in 2020. It actually became live, I think, in November. And for anybody who wonders why we've got legislation for that, it's twofold, really. One is actually to protect the environment in which the cabling is coming in and out of Bermuda. And the other is actually to protect the cables themselves. Until this legislation was in place, the cables that you mentioned we've already got were not protected in any way by law, certainly not in a format like should be in modern day society. And there certainly wasn't any, I don't think, a serious regard towards the impact the cables would be having on the infrastructure and environment around it. So what this is doing is it's providing anyone who is in that sector or who's reliant upon cabling, and anybody who wants to lay new cabling down, can take advantage of a protected zone. And that means that there is a particular area where you can actually lay a cable into Bermuda. You have to apply for permission to first of all install it, and then you have to get permission to actually then, or a license to actually operate it. But effectively, it gives the cable company some comfort and security and knowledge that that it is protected from the likes of fishing, dredging, or explosives, or any other activity that could damage or interrupt that particular infrastructure. And at the same time, it then allows the environment to be protected, because it causes us to concern around the actual, whatever environment that is. There's actually a harvesting of bethos, which is an interesting area, obviously a completely different topic for just another day's discussion, but it actually introduces protection around that and allows for that to occur. So that's the first thing that we've actually done in terms of the submarine cabling.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. And it is quite, the one thing I would like to sort of say on that is being sort of a former past president of Suboptic, having this sort of legislation is best practice. It's quite unique from a country's perspective. I know of Australia, I know New Zealand, I know a couple of other countries that have this legislation. And the organization as a global entity is actually trying to encourage countries to do exactly what Bermuda has done with creating this legislation. It's really about best practice for landing systems and providing that protection. So it's really great to see that Bermuda's taken this on board and run with it, because it's a great step forward. So Joel, moving to you perhaps in terms of some of the international things, what are you seeing? And particularly if you're thinking about sort of also not only internationally, but Bermuda and how things have changed since 2019. And I know you've been, for instance, also working with Bermuda's regulatory authority.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. It's an exciting time, I think, for the world and for Bermuda in particular. When you look around the Atlantic and the location physically of where Bermuda sits, and also where it sits on the world stage from a regulatory environment, it bodes well for the future. And the changes that we've seen a significant amount of growth around Africa with regards to the subsea community, and also enhanced growth in South America on both coasts, on the Pacific and the Atlantic region. And the third piece over here of note for Bermuda is a significant amount of rebuild that's required throughout the Caribbean, because a lot of the cables that are in there are coming towards their end of life period right now. So Bermuda in particular has a couple of cables that in the next 5 to 10 years, I think, will achieve their technical end of life. And so that means that they'll be looking for new cables, new technology that comes along with it, and new opportunity as well. So some of these best practices that we've seen emerge and really come into popularity, both from a commercial aspect and also acceptance by the people in the regulatory environment, are some of the regulatory items that were discussed earlier by Steve. The regulatory environment in Bermuda has had significant enhancement done to it to help attract the cable systems over there in Bermuda itself. And I think really has placed it right on the center stage of being internationally competitive within that environment. A lot of, and that's to attract not only subsea cables, but the businesses that want to use it. Bermuda has taken it appears to me that Bermuda has taken a very positive approach to try to make the cables, the opportunity for the cables to land there, not just transit through. In other words, they would regenerate the signal and move on to somewhere else. But Bermuda is creating an opportunity where that information would actually stop, be used by the various businesses whether it's in fintech, insurance, reinsurance, all of the different commodity areas of Bermuda. And there's been a lot of work over there. And these things, you're seeing them kind of coupled together. That has been a big plus that I've seen since our last discussion 2 years ago. This is replicating what is going on around the entire Atlantic basin as well. You're seeing improvements on the regulatory environment in the US, in the UK, in the African nations. Everybody is really working hard. They realize that in order to be competitive in this environment, one of the key areas that they have to address is the regulatory environment. It addresses the landing, any kind of fee structures that might be charged to help really the governments recoup some of the costs that are used, the capital that is used to put the protection zones in place, et cetera. And a lot of that is covered by some form of tax base. And Bermuda has done a great job in addressing those from a regulatory perspective and really being kind of a leader on the world stage for those practices as well.
Thanks, Joel. And just sort of to add to that, I know when I look at how Bermuda has really promoted itself in that regulatory space, I think it has a 60-day guarantee up to 75 days for a license or a permit to be issued, which is if you know this space, that's huge. It can be, what is it in the States, Joel? How long does it take in the States to get that sort of approval?
Typically, to get through the FCC licensing practices, it's averaging a little over a year.
Yeah. So for Bermuda to have that space with the guarantee, and that just I think speaks to sort of the processes, and also speaks to how we're thinking about it as what I'll call it as a concierge service. To encourage, because as you say, Joel, we've got some cables that are coming up to their end of the life, so we do want to attract new systems to not only transit through us, but also to land in us. And that kind of is a really good segue into sort of, what, now that we've got these frameworks in place, what makes Bermuda special, and, basically why would companies locate themselves here or operate from here? And it's basically what sets us apart is from a jurisdiction perspective. So Steve, I know you're dealing with a lot of different companies and from a commercial perspective. So what are you hearing from those companies as to why they want to locate here?
Yeah, I think it's worth just jumping off the back of the end of that conversation, what Joel was saying. I think this is just, it's showcasing how the Bermuda government and the country as a whole and industry are positioning Bermuda well for this particular sector. And we're not just looking at it as we want cable companies or otherwise, or we want satellite companies. It's just showing that, look, if you come here in any capacity, a business that uses digital infrastructure of any kind, or you are in that space yourself, then you are welcome, and you will find that there is this concierge service, that there is an infrastructure that it's still being developed. Let's not forget, but it's already there in some places, like the submarine cabling. If you think about it from this perspective, I'm seeing companies like data centers, data mining centers, and also crypto mining centers being set up all around the world. And whilst crypto mining, for example, digital asset mining, isn't actually something that's a particularly regulated activity, even under our own digital asset business sector, it does require a couple of things. One is the ability to send information and plug into the internet. And so what we could find is, if our actual cable systems are continually improved and we can resolve some other issues that we do have, particularly around sort of price of energy, for example, that we could find an attraction for data centers to be here, be they for data mining, be they for data storage, or even they could be just part of a cloud system where information needs to come in, land, and disappear again. So there are huge numbers of businesses looking at Bermuda for things like that. But it's not just data centers either. We've got the whole digital asset infrastructure here that was established back in 2017. And that was another great effort by government, led by Premier Burton, the government, and industry, in establishing a legal and regulatory framework, first of its kind really in the world, that actually looks to regulate and combat fraud and money laundering and terrorist financing in the area of digital assets, or crypto, as a lot of people like to call it around the world. So there's another example of how, as a country, as a government, and as an island, we're showing people that we're not afraid of new technology. We're not afraid of what comes with it. In fact, we look to embrace it. We welcome innovation, not just through our regulatory approach and legislative approach, but simply in engaging with it. There are numerous projects that probably are the subject of other panel sessions during this tech summit, but the likes of digital ID, tokenization, digital currency in Bermuda, other payment mechanisms, things that actually will affect everybody around the world and relies upon digital infrastructure. And another thing that has been introduced through this legislative framework is testing license. Bermuda is a small island. It's 66,000 odd people, roughly speaking. And so it's a wonderful little sort of petri dish in which to test technology too. And so you can bring completely innovative new ideas to Bermuda, speak directly with the regulator and the government and industry, and participate in testing your, a beta phase of your technology, whilst also getting the infrastructure and support for more regular financing raisings, things like that.
And I think that's a really good point about sort of the sandbox approach that Bermuda has, whether it's sort of trialing a particular product or service, or whether it's about the pink sandbox we have with our data privacy,
data
and how you can think about that, and data protection, and how you can sort of gives you the authority or the regulatory framework to actually try things in a safe way, in a forward-thinking way.
Yeah, and I think what it's done, at least we've seen through a lot of our clients, is it's lended credibility and legitimacy to some of these businesses that have been looking for certainty. The whole point of a lot of these pieces of legislation and regulatory frameworks are to, one, attract people to say, look, you get certainty and protection, but at the same time, it's protecting Bermuda by saying, yes, you can come here and do it and get protection, but you have to meet these standards. So we're not welcoming absolutely anybody and everybody in every single sector around the world. We're simply saying, look, we know how to regulate and how to legislate around certain areas in best practice, following and sometimes leading in the way of a global standard. A great example, actually, is in the digital asset sector. We introduced AML, ATF, the anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing regime to the digital asset sector before FATFA even came out with their guidance in 2019. And thankfully, having looked at this from an industry and a regulator and a government perspective, and with the guidance of all the professionals available to us, we're able to build something that was then pre-met what the expectation was when it came down the line. And now we've got a regulator with 4 or 5 years experience of managing this, whereas other jurisdictions are still trying to figure out how they draft their legislation. So it is an indication of how willing and not just willing, I think how well thought through and future thinking, future proofing Bermuda government and regulator is or are in building this new digital infrastructure, or allowing the environment in which to allow it to flourish.
So speaking of flourishing then, Joel, as somebody's outside, what do you think Bermuda's secret sauce is? What is it about us that would attract people to us, or what sort of things do we need to think about as well? So it's sort of a double-edged question. It's not only is our secret sauce, but what's the innovation piece that we need to be thinking of?
So I think of that in terms of how do you buy down the risk, right? If you're a supplier that wants to build an asset that wants to land in Bermuda, and you're going to come in and identify the regulatory environment, you're going to find out that Bermuda, through its thought leadership and its activity on the governmental side and the regulatory side, has bought down my risk by reducing those timelines that we just mentioned. For a year plus for licensing and permitting on the US side, and here you are with a 75-day process, which is wonderful. You're buying down my risk. You're providing certainty to the market that when we have an approved solution, I'm not going to have any issues in Bermuda. The second part is geographically where you sit. How do we buy down the risk, and how do we look at that from the environmental stage? When we look at one of the big things that we concern ourselves with is the health and well-being of these systems. Where Bermuda is, and when it comes to hurricanes, we see the predominant, when we do the tracking and we look at tracking over a 100-year period, you see that the majority of these actually go south into the west of Bermuda and typically run up the slot and then go back out to sea north of Bermuda. And although you have had some that have gone right over the country's actually been built to sustain these hurricanes. It's wonderful having visited there and what you do and how you practice that. So the offshore approach, the regulatory environment, and it's really from a commercial standpoint is how are you buying down the risk, and you're ticking the boxes for all of those activities across the board. I think that's a big plus for Bermuda. And then finally, the other thought that I have on this is the cost of your regulatory framework and the cost of operations in Bermuda is low comparatively to the market. And that's been done purposefully in Bermuda, and it's managed. And that's also another attraction as well that I would call out on these of what makes Bermuda special. Those are the kind of the three highlights for me.
I love that last bit on the cost. I'm going to take that and run with that. That's what we certainly like to do, is to create innovative products that are low cost, that are encouraging companies to come here. So Jeane, just sort of in terms of sort of your perspective, what's making Bermuda competitive, and what's making us interesting, and what are we doing?
Sorry, needed to unmute myself. I think I just piggybacking on what Steve was saying and Joel about innovation. We've recognized the need to embrace innovation, not just in the sector of digital assets. We embrace it with respect to the energy industry. Right now, we're undertaking hopefully soon. I mean, some amendments to the existing regulatory regime to allow for more innovation. Traditionally, we had been somewhat risk averse, at least in the energy sector, and now we're embracing that innovation, understanding that with other technologies coming in, one of the things that will make us even more attractive is if we can lower the cost of energy. That is somewhat high in Bermuda, and so we're introducing a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox for the energy sector, and indeed for other regulated sectors. The amendments that we're seeking to introduce, while they're focused on the near horizon on the energy sector, they seek to embrace the telecommunications sector as well. So hopefully that increases our appeal once those amendments are complete. Specifically, we're looking at how licenses are issued. Right now, you can only get a license to be an energy producer if your technology is proven somewhere else in the world. Well, we're trying to allow space for that proof to happen in Bermuda. So kind of widening the net a bit to include other technologies. So that's a big plus for us. In terms of our space and satellite products, I'm not sure the rest of the world realizes what a long relationship we've had with the United States, with NASA, with the European Space Agency, with the UK Space Agency. So we have a really nice confluence of relationships with other countries and other regulatory regimes. In fact, we had a prospective satellite operator come to us and say one of the things that they appreciated about Bermuda so much, and this is, I think, should be our tagline, is we have all the benefits of working with the UK with none of the hassle. So that's a real plus for us, that our jurisdiction, if you register a satellite here, it means that you will register through the UK. They are the licensing authority, but you kind of get a side door in, and our support for that registry as an example of the kinds of services that we can provide. We've also had Earth station services. So some are government facilities and some are not, but we've had I think it's about a 60+ year relationship with the United States, with NASA, where we provide ground support for all kinds of mission launches, from sounding rockets to resupplying the space station, the International Space Station. Couldn't happen without us. So we're very proud of that.
I mean, who knew? Yeah, it's amazing when you actually find out these things about what actually people are doing. So I really would like to thank everyone for their time on the panel. We have covered a number of different sort of aspects on it. And really, I'd just like us to, if we could, if anyone is interested, to join us now to continue the conversation and carry on any additional Q&A after in the session room, which will be following this. So thank you to the panel, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.